G'day, good evening. Happy Sunday. I hope you had a wonderful weekend. I certainly did. And I'm pretty sure that Angus Taylor did. Why? Because he is, of course, now the Liberal Party leader. No ifs, no buts, and the margin was quite decisive. I'll tell you how the first polls have reacted to the change in Liberal leadership. We'll also talk about Susan Lee's decision to leave the Parliament, meaning that there is an immediate by-election. Now, this could go status quo, it could go One Nation, or don't be afraid of a local independent or even a Tiffany Teal. There's lots of options that could well end up taking place. No Sooks, no Lefties tonight, highlighted by the wonderful Jacinta Nampijinpa Price. She will join us in a moment or two's time. Not this Sunday, because that's tonight, but next Sunday we're going to be in Tassie. If you'd like to join us for our town, now, last time we were in Tassie, it was the middle of winter. It's going to be particularly lovely to be there at the back bits of summer. Next Sunday night, if you can fill the room, please do. Ourtown at skynews.com.au for tickets. Include the number that you want, your first and last name, and a way we get back to you, OK? Ourtown at skynews.com.au this time next week in beautiful Burnie in Tasmania. As I mentioned, Angus Taylor is now the leader of the Liberal Party, thus the coalition, thus the opposition. His first task upon taking the job, and if you were watching our live coverage on Friday, I thank you, was an anticipation about what he was going to say that would be any different than what was being said the week before, the month before, or even, let's be honest, a couple of years before, because all of that had been rejected multiple times by the Australian people. The challenge is multi-fronted, and any multi-front war is always a difficult one to fight because, of course, you have the government in its strongest electoral position that it has been in a generation, and certainly the highest at the moment. You know, the flank of One Nation, and then again you throw in the Tiffany Teals and a whole bunch of other things. It is an unenviable position to be in, but signs of life, perhaps. An opinion poll has just been released by the 9 newspapers, The Age, the Sydney Morning Herald and the Brisbane Times, and it shows a ever so slight tick up for the Liberal and National Party. One Nation still remaining above, is actually now going from above to now dead heating them. Now, as you can see, Labor, basically where it was at the last election. I think they might be 1 point under, but still. The Liberal National Party way under. Remember, the Greens have basically floated around that 11. So the variable is always One Nation, and they are a little down from the last poll, which was 2 weeks ago. The Libs are a little up in the last poll. Now, let's have a look how this is in terms of under the last poll under Susan Lee versus the first poll under Angus Taylor. Now, One Nation, as you can see there, was going from 25 to 25, but you are seeing here a little uptick for the coalition there with 3 points. Where does it come from? Well, as you can see, it is one off the independents. It is theoretically one off the Greens and one off Labor. So all of that is rounding errors. This poll, of course, had to be completed by today, so did cover a little before, but essentially the changeover time of Friday and Saturday. Now, to give you an idea of just how strong One Nation's position is, and it is not a regional Queensland phenomenon that is somehow flipping the books. Let's have a look state by state. Now, remember, you need about 14% to be able to get a Senate seat. That would clearly mean another senator would be going in from New South Wales, as they currently sit at 24%. The Liberals down to 21, Labor at 32. In Queensland, now, interestingly, there is support for One Nation in New South Wales is 1 point higher than it is in Queensland. But in Queensland, the LNP is in front of One Nation. The margin, though, to Labor is a little bit tighter. So it's not quite a third, but you can see it's a full quarter, under a quarter, and a little bit over a quarter. That's in Queensland. Remember, 14% is the mark to be guaranteed a spot in the Senate. At 23%, you obviously get one person up, and at the next election that will be Pauline Hanson. But then it's a question about preferences, about whether the remaining 9% goes over to the LNP or the remaining 9% from them goes over to One Nation. Interestingly too, in Victoria, I apologise, that's where we are now. In Victoria, it's a higher number for One Nation than the LNP, and it is actually the highest supporting state in the country for One Nation is Victoria right now, where the margin between the government and One Nation is just 4 points. It is larger than that in New South Wales, larger than that nationally. So fascinating to watch. As for the rest of Australia, and this is not an offence to anyone living outside of the 3 states that I've mentioned thus far, statistically, it's a little bit of a sample from South Australia, Western Australia and Tasmania. Yes, there's smatterings in from the territories, but the outside and rest of Australia number. Now, part of the structural problem for the Liberal Party was that the rest of the Australian number used to be really good. The Western Australian proportion particularly was helped to make that a lot closer than, 12 points. Now, that is very significant when you have a look at the differences between, the 11 points, I should say, between the Liberal and National Party and the ALP. But again, One Nation in the rest of the country would be over 14%, and of course that would produce senators from Western Australia, where they've already produced one at the last election, South Australia, where of course Corey Bernardi's the leader right now, and fingers crossed in Tasmania, where our mate Lee Hansen will be joining us from later tonight. Now, as part of the future debate about whether Labor can continue to not have a majority of votes, but to have a majority of preferences go back their way, which provides them with a supermajority in the parliament, it's all about their ability to have the best story, or the one that people believe, on the key issues. The challenge for the Liberal Party is to come up with not definitions of the problem, but what are their solutions to the issues. We certainly know that One Nation has got clear answers to many of these questions, and they don't have to do such work because many of those positions have been the same for a very long time. Almost all of them are an echo of what worked for the party that took them up to doubling their parliamentary representation at the last election. Again, same poll from the Resolve poll that's going to be turning up in the Sydney Morning Herald, The Age and the Brisbane Times. So, top issues for people: keeping cost of living low, managing the finances. That's, of course, a reference to the broader government finances. Then it's health and aged care. Now, I think you could split healthcare and aged care, and let's see how they sit. But you know, I've talked a lot about how Gen X, one of the things that is affecting them is because they're starting to get line of sight to their parents and potentially their own lives in and around aged care, how that'll be paid for. There seems to be a double up between 2 and 4, but still, this is how they've categorised it: economic management and recovery. And again, back to point number 1, jobs and wages. That's your top 5 of the issues for Australian politics and Australian voters right now. Then 6 through 10, housing and rental prices are at 6. Crime and antisocial behaviour, this is a lot higher than any national political discussion often goes, but in places like Melbourne, in places like regional Queensland, or at least on the fringes of Brisbane, that's a massive issue. Education. Now, again, is this about getting easier access to university, or is this, as I believe it to be, people who think the current system is not good enough, and despite the hundreds of billions of dollars, the results keep going backwards? Then national security, and then managing natural disasters. Now, based off other polling, the only one of those 10 issues in which the Liberal Party is in front of anyone else is the 9th most important issue in the country, that being national security and defence. And again, it is very easy for people in and around the Liberal Party, and to a lesser extent One Nation. But of course, One Nation at this moment is not considered to be the party of government. They're playing, of course, to be opposition between now and the next election. What is the Liberal Party answer to cost of living? Now, is it going to be a repeat, largely, of what had been said before about a reduction in things like petrol taxes? Is it going to be bold ideas like instant asset write-off? Is it going to be major changes to the tax system that mean the current largest source of revenue to the government is the average working man or woman, and then by some margin is company tax, and then by some margin under $100 billion compared to almost $300 billion is the GST? I don't know. But again, this is where some of the meat needs to get on the bone. Now, obviously, any meat that's put on the bone by an opposition gets pulled apart by a government. But there has to be actual answers to many, if not all, of those before you start to get in the game. Because, yes, they have to break up with the government first. Remember, governments lose elections rather than oppositions win them necessarily. But also, for you to become a viable or attractive option is for not just this is a problem, but what is the potential solution? Which is why it is very important to note about the issues in this one poll and how they are ranked, and how often Those of us on the centre-right of Australian politics talk about them versus, and you know, cost of living's been what I've been thumping about for years in a row, but still, we talk a lot about energy. We talk a lot about renewable power. We talk a lot about nuclear, 12th most important issue to people. Immigration and refugees. Now, the same polls will tell us 50% of people think that too many people are coming in. 14th most important information. And again, for the Tiffany Teals or the Radical Greens, the environment and climate change sits below, among other things, the education system, crime, housing, healthcare and aged care. All of that matters, which is why I want to take some time talking about how the first pitch was made by the new leadership of the Liberal Party. Now, again, when we were sitting there on Friday morning, starting to move past whether he would become the Liberal leader, the questions were about what would be the first face that Angus Taylor would put on the Liberal Party. Jane Hume, of course, elected as his deputy. Well, very interestingly, there are a couple of moments outside of the big set-piece moments when people do pay attention. Now, there is a huge number of Australians who simply don't know Angus Taylor, so this was about a first introduction. Most people weren't watching television or listening to the radio at midday on a Friday, so how this was interpreted at the 6 p.m. news mattered. But because you may well have been living a busy life on Friday, I wanted to show you the first things that were said by Angus Taylor as the leader. What is he trying to do in terms of how he's introducing himself, what issues he's prioritising, and then marry that against what I just showed you about people and their feelings right now, not just about which political party is the best to handle something, but which issue is most important to them. This is the first, which was about his time that begins now as the leader of the Liberal Party and thus opposition.
We're in this position because we didn't stay true to our core values, because we stopped listening to Australians, because we were attracted to the politics of convenience rather than focusing on the politics of conviction. This ends today. This ends today. There is much work to be done to win back supporters and everyday Australians. But just as Australians have put faith in us before, I'm confident we can restore their faith in us again. It's on us to regain that trust and earn it, but the choice is simple for the Liberal Party: change or die.
Now, as you know, with politicians, they know the moments that they want to drive home, particularly for that 6 p.m. news. And as I was discussing and back and forthing with everyone on Friday morning here on air, I put a lot of emphasis on the 6 p.m. news, not because it is the single greatest source of news, but because, for obvious reasons, it is a well-established one that still more than 1 million people engage with each and every night. Still the collective #1 television show on free-to-air is the news. Once you put it together between 7 and 9 and you throw in the ABC, the collective news bulletin is #1 by a country mile. Maths might be fun to talk about, but it is the news that people pay attention to, which is why I am always trying to show you how the news sausage is made. Could come up with a better term, but still, you get the point, about how the media ask the questions, about how the media frame the reports, because it's not just about changing minds in one night, it's about changing them week after week after week, or reinforcing something. So, again, to that central issue of cost of living, and the central issue that has seen people move from the Liberal Party to One Nation, cost of living and borders. Here's how Angus Taylor delivered the message.
So many Australians can't afford to buy a home. Australians who are working 2 jobs are juggling whether they can feed their families or pay their electricity bills. Record immigration has added pressures to infrastructure, to services, to housing in this country. Our borders have been open to people who hate our way of life. People who don't want to embrace Australia and who want Australia to change for them.
Important stuff. A lot of people would like to hear such clarity from an opposition. Interestingly, though, in terms of the A1 issue, it remains cost of living. Now, does that mean that as politics has been turned by the Labor Party, it's about who can give me the handout? Or is it about looking at how to ensure that everything government has a finger in it's as low as possible. That things like the little ratchets up that happen when it comes to excise taxes are things that are thought of, or big and bold ideas like ones that One Nation have taken to an election. And again, once people start to read, I think people get quite turned on to, which is the idea that if you're a family, well, you would be able to take the highest income and average it out with the lowest income of your partner, your husband, your wife. That would be an interesting way of doing things, where it might mean many couples go from the highest possible tax rate to a little bit lower, or the most populous tax rate, which is in and around 40 cents, and maybe being able to push that down. It'd be fascinating to see. And again, to that conversation in and around home ownership and immigration. Now, you've just heard there about, again, the values being offered by Angus Taylor. Well, again, it is unsurprising to be floating around the issue of immigration.
So let me be clear about my resolve as leader and what the Liberal Party will stand for under my leadership. All Australians, especially young Australians, deserve the stability and the opportunity to own a home. We'll re-establish home ownership as the centrepiece of the Australian dream. We'll stand for an immigration policy that puts the interests of Australians first and puts Australian values at the centre of that policy. If someone doesn't subscribe to our core beliefs, the door must be shut. As Liberals, we stand for lower inflation, lower interest rates and lower taxes. Taxes on homes, taxes on superannuation, taxes on our children's future. Australia needs an energy policy that is based on common sense, not Labor's net zero ideology. We will get rid of Labor's bad carbon taxes on the family vehicle, on manufacturing and food in this country, and of course on electricity. We'll reduce financial pressures for families, expand childcare choice and give children the best start in life, not force every family into a universal system.
So, again, I wanted you to see things in their proper context. Obviously, it's a big day, a nervous moment for anyone. So, yeah, there's the checking of the notes. Some people mark that up, some people mark that down. But I think it was a reasonable start, OK? Now, again, politics is not going to change in a day. And while a week might be a long time in politics, it's going to be a lot longer than that to see exactly how the Liberal Party reintroduces itself, who it reconnects with. But, of course, remember, at the end of the day, while, yes, there is this significant number of people, the majority of which used to be Liberal voters that have gone off to One Nation, they have to take votes off the Labor Party. In part, that means you have to point out their problems. You have to also come up with better solutions. So some people who may well have written you off for any series of other reasons look at you because you have a potential answer to the big issues they care about. Just to stay with the One Nation phenomenon, there is, of course, the state electoral system beneath that is the national conversation. And while Pauline Hanson is, of course, a national politician, the power of One Nation at the state level will be tested twice this year. It'll be tested in South Australia and, of course, in Victoria. But interestingly, we've got some polling that starts to give us an idea about how they are travelling. There is an election not that far away, in fact, literally weeks away in beautiful South Australia. The leader of One Nation is none other than Cory Bernardi. And while they'll be running in every single seat, the hope is that they would be able to do what they did at the last election, which was to get a leader in the upper house elected. That would be Cory Bernardi, but hopefully to get maybe a two or even a third with them. So how do the numbers actually stick here? Well, as you can see, there has been quite a change from the last state election. In fact, you can see there that what was the best part of very low single digits that were there, very low single digits for the election. The change towards the end of last year saw a little bit of growth. Now, I think it's about 8% that's required to get yourself an upper house seat, which is why now a number with a 2 in front of it would mean potentially at least 2 people would be elected under the One Nation banner in South Australia. But the issue here is that while the Labor Party has remained relatively solid and is very dominant in South Australia, what could lead to further dominance is a growth in the Greens number. What is hope for the collective centre-right is that One Nation has grown, yes, at the expense of the Liberal Party, but an ever so slightly fall off independents and others. Now, remember, others were previously the Nick Xenophon Party, the Centre Alliance, SA Best, who, of course, were supposed to have some major impact at the last election, but, of course, they did not. So once you actually get rid of the others, including the Greens, and you had to divide the pie, well, Labor would win the majority of it, and the split would be 25 to 21 amongst the opposition of the One Nation Party, which, again, if it translates to lower house seats, but most likely it's about an upper house play. So all wait, watch and see. And because I love digging deeper than I ever should, just a couple of things I want you to point out here. The number one demographic that is backing One Nation is 50 to 64. That is the best demographic for One Nation. The best demographic anywhere for the Liberal Party are for people who have been to university and men. The best when it comes to the Labor Party is, ironically, people over the ages of 65 who have only been educated in high school, and even people living in regional areas. Interesting here, when you have a look at inner Adelaide, there's basically no giant difference between inner and outer Adelaide, 17, 18% for One Nation, it's all the orange. And then in regional, the Liberal Party runs third to the Labor Party on 29, One Nation on 26, meaning that those preferences, if the majority of them went to One Nation, they'd be able to beat Labor and perhaps start to take some of those lower house seats. So that election is sooner rather than later. That will be one of the first tests. Again, they got a member elected at the last state election, so they'd have to do better than that. So you'd have to imagine that Corey Bernardi being sent back in to politics, this time via the upper house of South Australia and One Nation, would be the dead level performance, but all of the indicators are that they would be well and truly above that. Remember, low single digits, now up to 20%, meaning that they could be playing on the fringes in some of those regional areas, which of course would give them representation downstairs, but still a Labor victory at this stage. As for Victoria, which I pointed out before is, according to the federal polls, the single strongest primary vote for One Nation is in Victoria. So what about the polling that has been done by the Demos organisation? Now, the Demos organisation does stuff that'll pop up in the Herald Sun, the Tiser, the Telegraph and the Courier Mail. And it shows here that in Victoria, the largest single primary vote is for the coalition, which is very solid to see. With the Labor Party, yes, down, but you've always got to remember, you basically can totally add the Greens to it and see how close to 50 that goes. The One Nation number, which is incredibly strong, being much higher than the Greens, much higher than the Tiffany Teals, well, presumably, if preference discipline, if most of the people, and I mean more than 7 out of 10, but most of the people who vote for One Nation preference a change of government via the Liberals could go very damn close. But a lot can be done between now and then. And if you want to know the story of Victoria, well, the Labor Party has gone backwards since the last election, but the Liberal Party has too. Labor had more of a margin to lose than the Liberals did. Any fallback in their vote becomes problematic, but you can see the giant surge is where it often is. In a poll, in a graph, showing orange over and over again. And while, yes, some people like myself will be working on the weekend, most will, of course, go back tomorrow. So in the spirit of that, while you were working, be it today or getting ready for it tomorrow, and you're paying tax, we pay for the politicians and their staffers to make crap like this on social media. Here is clueless Claire O'Neill. The Wiggles? The Wiggles? Okay. Ali France, who was the member for Dixon, she was, well, doing this with your money. And another Labor MP who's trying to be oh so cool when talking about the politics of the other side. Just a reminder, by the way, again, for all these Labor MPs that will say what they want to say when it comes to gender, the single politician in Australia who took down Julia Gillard, held back Tanya Plibersek's Anthony Albanese. The only party that, of course, is led by a woman is Pauline Hanson's One Nation. The only one that has a deputy leader is the Liberal Party, because the two people downstairs leading everything for the Labor Party, blokes. But it's them that have got the problem.